Story now that will dominate our conversations, I suspect, for some time to come in 2020. Parliament will not extend the deadline for submissions on land expropriation without compensation. Many are calling for more time to voice their opinions, but Parliament's ad hoc committee on amending the Constitution says submissions will close at the end of this month. Committee Chairperson Matole Motshekga joins me now from our studios in Pretoria to talk about this. So, Dr. Motshekga, you were criticized to a certain extent for the time at which you published the bill seeking to amend the Constitution to allow for expropriation of land without compensation, that being a time when we were going into the holidays. And now we're back from the holidays and people are asking you to sort of extend that time, and you're saying absolutely not. Why?
The critics did so because they didn't appreciate the fact that this has been a continuous process from the 5th Parliament to now, and it was not a new process. And before we agreed on the time frames, we convened an inclusive and representative come together at Parliament with all political parties and stakeholders. And we agreed on the time frames. We also agreed that the draft bill be gazetted for people to comment. So we did not unilaterally impose it on the country. But we also are saying the closing date is not the end of the story, because next month we are going to traverse the whole country to hold public hearings. We will listen to all South Africans in all their diverse languages, right, to give them an ample opportunity to make inputs. So nobody will be prejudiced.
Yeah, Dr. Motshekga, we saw the interest when you were initially asking the question whether or not the Constitution should even be amended to allow for expropriation without compensation. You went around the country. It looked like a referendum of sorts, exciting democracy really at that particular point. Tell me about the interest in as far as the substantive question is concerned, now commenting on the bill as you have crafted it. What have you received by way of written submissions?
Responses are coming in, but we must actually thank the president of the ANC, who has led the way from his Lekgotla to say that the powers should be vested in the executive to expropriate, and we are making an appeal on all other political parties to follow suit, because we had agreed with political parties that we will also give them an opportunity to make substantive proposals, and we are hoping that they will follow the example of the African National Congress and do the same, because we want to hear all political parties, however small, on these questions.
Right.
So that
Dr. Motshekga, because of time, let me get into the substance then of the bill that you have drafted as the ad hoc committee. In fact, before I do that, let me call it up and actually show the excerpts that are relevant. This is section 25.2b that you are seeking to amend. As it stands right now, it talks about property may be expropriated only in terms of a law of general application. And this is the key part: subject to compensation, the amount of which and the time and manner of payment of which have either been agreed by those affected or decided or approved by a court. If I bring up the second slide, I will show you that this section 25.2b stays pretty much the same in the proposed draft, except that what you do at the end of that sentence is to say that provided that in accordance with subsection 3A, another section you are proposing, a court may, where land and any improvements thereon are expropriated for the purposes of land reform, determine that the amount of compensation is nil, it's zero. So I suggest to you that you've not really done much there, Dr. Motshekga. All you've done is give the power to the courts to decide that in some instances they may decide that the compensation is zero.
No, because we are a multi-party democracy. We had to agree on a formulation which would be acceptable to the political parties so that we don't derail the process. But that formulation is subject to engagement by political parties and the people of South Africa as a whole. And as I said, the African National Congress has given the lead to say no to that formulation, that power should be given to the executive. And that's why we are calling on all other political parties and to all South Africans to make their input so that when we sit as parliament, now we must be guided by the will, aspirations of the people of South Africa as a whole.
I see.
The earlier formula. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead. You are going to talk about the earlier formulation.
The earlier formulation was to ensure that we reach consensus. Otherwise, we would have created controversy and we would not have been able to gazette the bill, and that would have derailed the process, and we didn't want to derail the process.
So you are saying to me, Dr. Motshekga, the gazetted formulation of the bill is different from what you now want as the ANC. In the gazetted formulation, as I was showing in the slides now, the power to decide instances where the compensation will be zero rests in the hands of the courts. You as the ANC wanted to rest in the hands of the executive.
That's what the ANC is saying. And we are saying that this is not an ANC process. Other political parties must make their inputs, and the people of South Africa as a whole must make their inputs, so that Parliament must be guided by the will of the people of South Africa as a whole, not by one or the other political party.
Isn't it sneaky, though, Dr. Motshekga, isn't it sneaky that you give us one bill that is the basis for people making written submissions, and then, as they would say in South African parlance, jiggy, you are suddenly talking about it's not going to rest in the hands of the courts, it will rest in the hands of the executive.
We have the experience that the court processes are arduous, they take time, they require resources, but the executive is a democratic government elected by the people of South Africa. They represent the people of South Africa, and they must govern, but we are not excluding the role of the courts, but we are not giving the courts the first opportunity to decide, because that will last another 25 years. And the people of South Africa cannot wait for another 25 years to get a resolution to this matter.
It's a difficult formulation, Dr. Motshekga, for me to wrap my head around. Who would keep the executive in check in terms of, making sure that, because you're now putting it in the hands of, the political powers of the day to decide instances where there would be no compensation for land expropriated. Who would keep their power in check?
They are a democratically elected government, but the powers of the courts to hear aggrieved parties is an entrenched power in the Constitution. So any aggrieved person reserves the right to go to the court and say, I have been prejudiced by the decision of the executive, then the courts will intervene. So there is a balance there, so no one needs to fear if eventually Parliament agrees with the recommendation that the executive must, the power to expropriate should vest in the executive.
All right, Dr. Matole Motshekga, thank you so much. Quite an interesting conversation. And I must admit that unless I completely missed it, I wasn't aware of this new proposed formulation where the power to decide instances where the compensation for land expropriated for restitution would be zero moves from the courts, as in the published draft bill to amend the Constitution, and moves to the executive. And that's what Dr. Matole Motshekga tells us this afternoon that the ANC is now proposing.